wife walked into my hospital room 3 days after my surgery and dropped a folder on the tray table next to my untouched lunch. She didn't sit down. She didn't ask how I was. She just stood there in her good coat, the navy one I bought her for our 35th anniversary, and said, "I want you to sign these. I'm done pretending. I'm 63 years old. I had just come through a triple bypass. My chest was held together with wire and willpower, and the woman I'd been married to for 37 years was looking at me like I was a piece of furniture she'd finally decided to throw out. "Sign what?" I said. My voice came out rougher than I expected. The breathing tube had only come out the day before. Divorce papers. She slid the folder closer to me with one finger, like she didn't want to touch the same surface my hands had touched. "I had them drawn up last month. I was going to wait, but I think we both know there's no point now." I looked at her face and tried to find the woman I'd taken to a drive-in movie in 1987. She wasn't there. Hadn't been there for a long time. If I was being honest with myself, which I hadn't been. Honest with myself, which I hadn't been. Honest with myself, I mean. Marriage will do that to you. You start telling yourself stories about the person across the breakfast table because the alternative is harder. "Why now?" I asked. "Because you survived." She said it flat. No apology, no softness. "And I'm not spending the next 10 years being your nurse. I want a real life before I'm too old to have one. Sign the papers. We can do this clean." There was a small clock on the wall above the door. Hospital issue. The kind with a red second hand that ticks too loud in a quiet room. I watched it for what felt like a long time but was probably only 15 seconds. The room smelled like that pink antiseptic soap and the lilies somebody had sent that I hadn't been awake long enough to read the card on. "Hand me the pen," I said. She blinked. I think she'd been expecting an argument. Maybe she'd practiced for one. Practiced the part where she stood firm and I begged. People who plan things out in their head get thrown off when the other person doesn't read from the same script. "Are you sure?" she said. Not because she cared, because she wanted to make sure I wasn't going to come back later and claim I'd been confused. "I'm sure." She handed me the pen. I signed my full legal name on every line she pointed to. My handwriting was a little shaky from the morphine drip they had me on, but it was clear. Anybody looking at it would know it was mine. I made sure of that. I even added the date underneath, the way I used to when I was running my own contracting business and signing change orders. She gathered the papers up fast like she thought I might change my mind and tucked them under her arm. "One more thing," she said at the door. "The hospital bills are yours. I already talked to the insurance about it. I'm not on the hook for any of this. You're a grown man. You can handle it." "Okay," I said. She left. The door wheezed shut behind her on that pneumatic hinge. The clock kept ticking. I lay there for a while just listening to it and to the soft hiss of the oxygen line clipped to my nose. Here's what she didn't know. 2 weeks before my surgery, I had lunch with my old college roommate. He's an insurance broker in Cincinnati now, retired technically, but he still keeps his hand in. We'd been talking about getting together for years, and when I scheduled the bypass, I figured I'd see him before they cracked my chest open in case it didn't go the way I hoped. We met at a chain restaurant off the highway halfway between his place and mine. Over a bowl of soup neither of us was particularly hungry for, he asked me about my coverage, just out of habit. He always asks people about their coverage. It's like a tick. I told him my wife handled all that. She always had. I gave him the name of the policy and the rough numbers I remembered. He frowned a little. He didn't say anything right then. But when I got home that night, there was an email from him. Subject line said, "Just so you know." He'd looked up some public filings. He'd noticed something he thought I should be aware of. The primary policyholder on our family health plan had been changed 3 months earlier, not by me. The beneficiary on a small life insurance policy I'd taken out 20 years ago and forgotten about had also been changed. Twice in the last 6 months. I read that email sitting at my kitchen table at 11 o'clock at night with the dog asleep on my feet. I read it 3 times. Then I closed my laptop and went to bed and didn't say anything to my wife the next morning over coffee. I'm not proud of being slow, but I'm 63. I've been married a long time. The mind protects you from things you're not ready to look at, and I wasn't ready that morning. I made oatmeal. I asked her if she wanted me to pick up dry cleaning. She said no. She'd get it. I went to work, came home, watched the news, went to bed. But I did one thing before I checked into the hospital for the surgery. I made copies of every financial document I could find in the house, tax returns going back 10 years, the deeds, the car titles, the retirement account statements. I scanned everything to a thumb drive and gave it to my younger brother, who lives 2 states away and who I trust more than anybody else on this earth. I told him to put it in his safe and not say a word. He didn't ask why. He's that kind of brother. So when she walked out of my hospital room with those signed divorce papers under her arm, she thought she was walking out with the only copy of the truth. She wasn't. The first thing I did after the door closed was reach for the call button. The nurse who came in was a young woman with dark circles under her eyes and a name tag that said her name was Cecily. I asked her if I could borrow a phone. Mine was at home. I'd been too out of it the first day to ask anybody to bring it, and after that, I'd kind of liked the quiet. "You can use mine for a minute, hon," she said, and handed me her cell. That kind of small kindness in a hospital is something you don't forget. I called my brother. He picked up on the second ring. "It happened," I said. "What happened?" "What we talked about." "Not exactly, but close enough." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "What do you need?" "Call my friend in Cincinnati. He'll know what to do next. And don't call me back on this number. I'll find a way to reach you." I hung up and gave the phone back to Cecily and thanked her. She must have seen something in my face because she paused at the door. "Is everything okay, sir?" "It will be," I said. I asked her one more thing before she left. I asked if the hospital had records of who came in and out of my room and when. She said yes. Visitor logs at the front desk plus the door access system tracked every badge swiped by staff. I asked if family signing in had to show ID. She said yes, always. Could I get a copy of my visitor log for my records? She looked at me a little funny. People don't usually ask for that, but she said she requested from the desk and bring it up. About 40 minutes later, she came back with 2 pages, printed neat, with my wife's name on it and the time she'd arrived and the time she'd left. 22 minutes in the room. 22 minutes to end 37 years. I folded those pages and tucked them under my pillow. That night, I didn't sleep much. I lay there with the IV hooked into the back of my hand, and I thought about the last 6 months. I thought about the way she'd been so insistent about handling the pre-surgery paperwork, the way she'd told me not to bother reading the new insurance forms because it's the same thing, just renewed. The way she'd taken my phone one Sunday afternoon to update something, and I hadn't thought twice about it. I thought about the man too, because there's almost always a man, or a woman. There's almost always somebody. I didn't have a name yet, but the way she'd said a real life before I'm too old to have one. That wasn't the language of a woman who was just done. That was the language of a woman who already had somewhere else to be. The next morning, my friend from Cincinnati called the hospital and had himself put through to my room as my primary care liaison. Nobody questioned it. He asked me one question. "Did you sign anything?" "Yes." "Was it clear?" "Yes." "Good. Don't sign anything else. And don't talk to her again without me on the phone." He told me he'd be at the hospital by supper time. He drove 4 hours that day to sit in a chair next to my bed with a yellow legal pad and a Bic pen. He didn't say much. He just listened while I told him everything I knew and everything I suspected and everything I'd done 2 weeks ago when I'd made those copies. When I finished, he looked at his notes for a long minute. "Your wife may have committed a few different kinds of fraud," he said. "Insurance fraud at minimum. Possibly identity-related, depending on whose signature is on those policy changes. We'll need to see them. My brother has copies." Smart man, your brother. He stayed 3 days. Slept at a Hampton Inn down the road. Came back every morning with coffee for both of us and a fresh page on his legal pad. By the end of the week, he'd contacted the insurance company on my behalf and requested certified copies of every change made to every policy in my name in the last 12 months. By law, they had to provide them. He also had a paralegal he knew at a firm in town, pulled the public records on our joint accounts and the small life insurance policy. What came back was uglier than I'd let myself imagine. The health insurance policy holder had been switched to her name 3 months before my surgery. That alone wasn't necessarily damning. Spouses can be primary holders. But she'd also adjusted the coverage. Specifically, she'd dropped the rider that covered post-surgical rehabilitation and home nursing. The bypass was covered. The 10 weeks of cardiac rehab I was going to need afterward was not. The home health visits? Not covered. The follow-up appointments with the cardiologist for the next year? Out of pocket. She'd left me the surgery and stripped away the recovery. The life insurance was worse. She'd increased the death benefit on the old policy I'd forgotten about, the one from when our kids were small. Tripled it, paid the higher premiums out of our joint checking, where she knew I never looked because she handled the bills, and she'd named herself the sole primary beneficiary, removing our 2 grown children, who'd been the contingent beneficiaries since the policy was written. She had increased a payout on a man whose chest was about to be cut open. My friend showed me the documents one at a time across my hospital tray. He didn't editorialize. He just laid them out the way a fisherman lays out his catch on a dock, one fish at a time, and let me look at what I was holding. "What do you want to do?" he said when he was done. "I want to think for a day," I said. "Don't do anything yet. Smart." That night after he left, I asked Cecily if I could use her phone again. She said sure. I called my younger sister who lives in Florida. We don't talk much, but when we do, it's real. I told her what was happening in about 3 sentences. She started crying. I let her. "What are you going to do?" she finally asked. "I'm going to be very quiet," I said. "And I'm going to be very quiet," I said. "And I'm going to be very thorough. And when it's done, she's going to understand exactly what she did." "Don't get bitter. That's what she wants." "I'm not bitter," I said. And it was true. I wasn't. I was clear. There's a difference, and you only learn it after about 60 years. The next day, my daughter came to visit. She lives about an hour away and works as a school principal, so she could only come on weekends. She brought my grandkids' drawings and a tin of those terrible store-bought cookies the cardiac diet allowed me to have 1 of per day. She sat in the chair my friend had been sitting in and held my hand and asked how I was feeling. "Honey," I said, "I have to tell you something, and I need you not to react until I'm finished." I told her. The whole thing. From the email at the kitchen table to the divorce papers to the insurance changes. I told her about my brother, about my friend, about the visitor log under my pillow. I told her I was going to handle it, and I didn't want her doing anything rash. She didn't say a word until I was done. Then she stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the parking lot for about a full minute, and came back and sat down. "Mom did this," she said. "Not a question. Yes. Was it the surgery or was it before?" "Before." The surgery just gave her a deadline. She nodded slowly. "She has my temperament, that girl. Always did. Steady. What do you need from me, Dad?" "I need you not to call her. I need you to act normal if she calls you. And I need you to keep this from your brother for now. He's going to be angry, and angry is loud." "Okay." She stayed until visiting hours ended. Before she left, she leaned down and kissed my forehead the way her mother used to, before things changed, and she said, "Tell me when I can stop pretending." "Soon, baby. Soon." I was discharged 8 days after the surgery. My wife had not been back. She'd sent one text message to my daughter, asking how I was, "Since I'm sure your father's not speaking to me," in that tone she used when she wanted to seem like the wronged party. My daughter had answered politely and not said anything else. When the hospital car service dropped me off at home, I noticed right away that some things were missing. Her good silver from the dining room, the painting in the hallway that her mother had given us as a wedding present, her clothes from the closet, her photos from the dresser, not all of her things. Enough to make a point, enough to say, "I'm already gone," in case you didn't know. I sat down on the couch and looked around the house I'd lived in for 29 years, and I let myself feel it for about 10 minutes. Then I got up and made myself a cup of tea, the herbal kind the cardiologist had okayed, and I called my friend. "I'm home," I said. "Let's start." What followed took 5 months. I'm not going to pretend it was easy or that I was calm the whole time. There were nights I sat in the recliner the doctor wanted me to sleep in for the first 6 weeks, and I cried like a kid. 37 years. We raised 2 children. We buried both her parents and my father. We took one big trip to Ireland for our 25th, and she cried at the cliffs of Moher because she couldn't believe she was actually there. I'd held her elbow because the wind was strong and she was wearing the wrong shoes. You don't unmake a life like that without grief. Anybody who tells you otherwise hasn't lived one. But grief and clarity can sit in the same chair at the same time. I learned that on those long nights. You can miss the woman she used to be, or the woman you thought she was, and still understand exactly what the woman she'd become had tried to do to you. My friend brought in a divorce attorney from his network, a woman about my age, semi-retired, the kind who had seen everything and wasn't impressed by drama. She read the file my friend had built, and she let out a long, low whistle. "Honey," she said to me, "your wife is in a lot of trouble. The question is, how much of it you want to make happen?" "All of it," I said, but quietly. She nodded like she understood exactly what I meant. The first thing she did was file a motion to set aside the divorce papers I'd signed in the hospital. Not because I wanted to stay married. I didn't, but because the papers had been drawn up under a presumption that I had no documentation of her financial moves, and we wanted to renegotiate the terms with full disclosure on the table. The judge granted it without much argument, apparently signing legal documents 3 days post-surgery while on opioid pain management is, in the words of my attorney, not a great look for the other side. The second thing she did was contact the insurance company's fraud department with copies of the original policies, the change forms, my own affidavit about not authorizing the changes, and the timing of everything. The insurance company opened an investigation. They referred it to the state insurance commissioner's office. That's when things stopped being a divorce and started being something else. My wife found out about the fraud investigation before she found out about the motion. I know because she called the house phone for the first time in 2 months. I let it go to the answering machine. We still had one. She'd never wanted to get rid of it. Her voice was different, tight, a little high. "We need to talk. This is getting out of hand. Please call me back." I didn't call her back. A week later, she called my daughter. My daughter, bless her, said exactly what we'd rehearsed. "Mom, I love you, but I think you should talk to Dad through his lawyer." My wife hung up on her. The man, when I finally found out about him, turned out to be somebody I knew. Not well, but I knew him. He was a real estate agent in our town, a few years younger than us, a widower for about 3 years. His wife had been a sweet woman who used to sing in the church choir with my wife. He'd come to her funeral. We'd shaken his hand. He'd cried. My wife had been seeing him for at least 18 months, maybe longer. The phone records my attorney pulled in discovery showed call patterns going back at least that far. Late evenings, sometimes hours. Hotels in the next county over had her name on registration cards on weekends. She told me she was visiting her cousin. I'm not going to lie. That part hurt the most. Not the betrayal in the abstract. The specifics. The fact that she'd been driving 40 minutes away to lie next to another man on Saturdays. I'd been doing yard work. The fact that he'd come to my house once for a Christmas party 2 years ago and shaken my hand and complimented my wife's pie. The fact that she looked me in the eye every morning for a year and a half and made me coffee and asked me about my day. There are betrayals, and there are betrayals. The legal kind, the financial kind, the medical kind. Those you can fight with paperwork. The other kind just sits in your chest and aches. But here's the thing about being 63. You've already had things ache before. You know an ache is not a wound. It's a feeling, and feelings move through you if you let them. I let it move through you if you let them. I didn't drink it away. I didn't call her up and scream. I didn't do anything stupid. I went to cardiac rehab 3 times a week, paid out of pocket, kept the receipts. I walked the dog. I called my daughter and my son. I told my son the truth eventually, and he was angry, and I let him be angry. And he came home for a weekend, and we drove out to a fishing spot we hadn't been to since he was 12. And we didn't catch anything, but we sat on the dock for 4 hours, and he said, "Dad, I'm proud of you." And I had to look away for a minute. The state opened its investigation in March. By April, my wife had hired her own attorney, a guy from the city who clearly hadn't read the file before he showed up at the first hearing, because his face changed 3 times in 20 minutes. By May, the man was no longer answering her calls. I know that because she sent me an email, actually emailed me, like a stranger, saying she wanted to talk as adults and that things had gotten complicated. I forwarded the email to my attorney without responding. In June, we settled. By settled, I mean she signed an agreement that gave me the house, my retirement accounts, and a substantial portion of the joint assets. She kept her own retirement, a car, and what was left in her personal checking. The fraud investigation was a separate matter run by the state, and she had her own legal exposure to deal with there. My attorney made clear in the settlement that nothing in our divorce agreement would interfere with the state's case. My wife signed it because her attorney told her she had no leverage. He was right. The criminal piece took longer. About 14 months in total. I don't want to get into all of it because some of it is still being worked out as I'm telling you this. But there were charges. There was a plea. There was a sentence that was lighter than some people thought it should be and heavier than she clearly thought she'd ever face. She did not go to prison, but she pled to a felony, paid restitution, and lost her real estate license, which she'd kept active even though she hadn't sold the house in years. She also, as I understand it, lost the man who had quietly stopped returning her calls the moment things got serious. I didn't go to the sentencing. My daughter went. She told me about it that evening over the phone. She said her mother had cried. She said her mother had looked at her and asked, "Why didn't you warn me?" And my daughter had said, "Because Dad asked me not to, and because you didn't deserve to be warned." I don't know if I should be proud of my daughter for saying that or worried about her. Probably both. We're complicated, my kids and me, after all this. But we talk every Sunday. I'm telling you this story now, almost 2 years out from the day she put those papers on my tray table, because somebody asked me at coffee last week if I was angry. We were sitting in a diner I go to most mornings. A man I'd met at cardiac rehab, around my age, also divorced, also rebuilding. He asked it the way men our age ask things, kind of sideways, looking down at his coffee cup. "Are you still angry at her?" I had to think about it. I think I owed him a real answer. "No," I said. "I'm not angry. I'm not even sad, most days. What I am is awake. For a long time I was asleep in my own life. I let somebody else handle the things I should have handled. I told myself a story about a marriage that wasn't true because the truth was inconvenient, and I almost paid for that with everything I had." He nodded slowly. "What woke you up?" he asked. My old college roommate looking up an insurance policy. He laughed a little, so did I, but the truth is, it wasn't really my friend. He just gave me information. The waking up was something I had to do myself. In a hospital bed, with a tube in my chest, and a decision to make about whether I was going to pretend or pay attention. Plenty of people in my position would have torn up those papers and demanded an explanation. They'd have made a scene. They'd have given her the chance to lie to them again because that's what she'd been doing for a long time. And people get good at the things they practice. I didn't make a scene. I signed the papers. I let her think she'd won. And then I got very quiet and I got very thorough and I let the truth do its work without me having to shout it. If you're listening to this and something in your own life feels off, a feeling you've been pushing down, a question you've been not asking, a bank statement you've been not opening, I want you to hear this from somebody who's been there. Pay attention. Pay attention quietly. Don't tip your hand. Don't react before you understand. And don't ever tell yourself that what you're seeing isn't what you're seeing because the alternative is too painful. The alternative is always painful, but the alternative is always painful, but the alternative is also survivable. I survived it. I'm sitting in my own house, in the recliner I now actually like, with the dog at my feet. The same dog who slept on my feet that night I read the email. He's older now. So am I. We're both doing fine. The papers she handed me that day in the hospital weren't the end of my marriage. The marriage had ended a long time before, in increments I hadn't been brave enough to count. What those papers were, what my signature on them was the start of me finally telling the truth about what I'd been living in. And once you tell the truth about that, you can't go back. I don't want to go back. If this story landed somewhere and you leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I read them. I really do. And if you got somebody in your life who needs to hear that quiet doesn't mean weak, share it with them. There's a kind of strength that doesn't raise its voice. I learned about it late. I'd rather you learned about it now. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since that day in the hospital. People like to talk about karma like it's some mystical force, but in my experience, it's something simpler and more ordinary than that. It's just the truth eventually catching up to itself. My wife spent 3 months quietly moving pieces on a board she thought I couldn't see. She changed a policy here, a beneficiary there, told a small lie at the breakfast table, then a bigger one. Each move felt small to her. Each move was a thread, and threads, when you pull on enough of them, unravel. What I've come to understand, sitting in this recliner most evenings now, is that character is not what we do when somebody's watching. It's what we do when we're certain nobody is. She was certain nobody was. She'd handled the bills for 30 years. She'd renewed the policies. She'd had my password. She believed her invisibility was permanent. It wasn't. Nothing built on a lie ever is. The thing she didn't account for was that I had spent my whole working life building things, and a man who has poured concrete and framed walls knows that what holds something up is not how pretty it looks, but what it's resting on. Our marriage had been resting on her telling the truth. The day I learned she wasn't, the structure was already condemned. She just didn't know it yet. I want to say something to anybody around my age who's listening. We get told our whole lives that strength looks like a certain thing. Loud, fast, reactive. I'm here to tell you that's a young man's idea of strength, and it costs you. Real strength, the kind that protects what matters, is patient. It pays attention. It does the homework. When my old college roommate sent me that email, I had a choice. I could confront her and feel righteous for an evening, or I could go quiet and protect the people I love. I went quiet. I'm not bragging about that. It cost me something walking around my own house pretending for those last weeks before the surgery. But I knew, even then, that one good night of yelling would have destroyed any chance of my children's futures being protected, of my own recovery being affordable, of the truth being told in a forum where it actually mattered. Decency isn't softness. Patience isn't weakness. And clarity, when you finally find it, isn't cold. It's just clean. The hardest work I did during that whole stretch was not letting bitterness move into the house she'd already half emptied. Bitterness would have been her last gift to me, and I refused to accept it. I'd rather be 65 and clear-eyed than 50 and full of poison. If you're carrying something right now and you don't know whether to speak or wait, ask yourself what protects the people you love. Then do that. The rest will sort itself out, the way it sorted itself out for me.